speed breakers or the barriers going in. Thank you.
Very well put, Subbu. Rajaram, what's your take on the barriers?
As he mentioned, the barriers are pretty much what he said. But I would just go on to the next part of it. How do you overcome that based on what the book says? Living values is something which he gives a very wonderful way of listing out what are your core values. And she gives about 20 odd and then gives a lot of blanks and so you fill. But then she says, question yourself, what is the value that drives you? And you should not have more than 2 defining values out of that. Okay? And as Ram mentioned, Ratan Tata, he put that thing about compassion and what was the other one? Humility. Humility and compassion as the defining values that Ratan Tata lived by. This is what they want to bring it across. When you say values, we must all know the values of the entire team of company leaders and the team members. We should understand each other's core values. And that's an exercise that needs to be done. And then once we decide as a team, as a company, what our core values are, she goes on to describe how do you actually build it into behavior which can be measured. Unless you do that, you will not be living the values. The second thing, she gave a wonderful example which really hit me hard was the fact that there was one recounting of a case study with the United States Air Force. One of the senior most persons was giving a talk there and she was doing a briefing session to a very, very busy time. They were all over-exhausted with work because they were doing a major exercise. And the lady who was the commander of the base calls and asks, what do you want to say? And they all complained that, can we slow down these operations? We are just exhausted. She then asks one question. And mind you, these are all hardened defense people. She asks one question. How many of you are feeling lonely? And immediately 15 people put up their hands and said, we are feeling lonely. No, the complaint about the pace of work was not related to exhaustion, but the fact that they were lonely. And if you give them time off, they're going to be even more lonely because there is not much of family for them. So you have to address it differently. And then she goes on to explain how they went back to the United States Air Force manual, which was drawn up as a code of conduct from the archives, and they found statements all relating to emotions. There was 120 odd occasions where in that manual it talks about love, talks about honesty, talks about integrity. Whereas the current version is all transactional and it doesn't have any of those words. So they went about changing all that and to recalibrate and see how they can bring in a defense context where it's hierarchy oriented and being strong is one of the most important basic necessities that an officer must demonstrate to his people. Yet, they also feel there is a need to be emotionally connected. And that is one reason why she talks about how do you bring all that you think that is related to emotions into practice is through certain tools and methods which she discusses. And that's what I found very interesting and probably something which we can imbibe. Taking the case of the Tata example, the way there was a famous YouTube session by a Harvard professor where he discusses the 26/11 attack and what happened. And he goes on to say the hiring policies of Tatas to recruit staff from smaller towns in India, and none of them left their post, even though many died. They ensured that every gust was probably taken care of and brought to safety. Not a single one. And they were not motivated by money. And the second important thing that he oriented and brought as a value system into the Taj Hotel group is the basic training and the basic inculcation that is there in their system is the particular employee of Taj Hotels, his basic duty is defined as being the ambassador of the guest who is coming into Taj and being the ambassador of the guest to the company. So he is supposed to work as an ambassador of the guest who is coming in. That philosophy and the fact that they came from small towns with a lot of ethics and background and relationships are the ones that ensured that none of the staff ever left their post. And it is a remarkable case study that has been done by Harvard professor Deshpande, and you can find it in YouTube. The third thing which resonated with me is a talk by Lieutenant General A. Arun recently, some time back. That's also available in YouTube on leadership. I think he gave it in one of the colleges. And it's about 45 minutes to 55 minutes. He talks about the key aspects of leadership in a crisis. And if you look at that, he again stresses on the esprit de corps and how that has imbibed the culture of being together for everything, how that is imbibed in the armed forces and how that is the differentiator when it comes to fighting a war or being in a crisis situation. The living of the values is something that is very important that we can learn from here, and those are the techniques that she discusses to make sure those barriers are crossed.
Wonderfully put, and rightly said, you can have values, but you need to live by it. I get reminded of another story which all of you may be familiar with. When Ratan Tata was invited to London to be honored with a knighthood or something, and he refused to go. You know the reason? Because his dog was sick. And he said, that's important to me. Now that defines the value for me. And whenever I went to a Tata company, like how employee felt, even as a visitor, I felt very valued and comfortable. I think that's the culture which value brings, and it goes to show that we have very strong emotional content in those companies where we are valued. That's Now I come to two specific questions. Subbu, this is very specific to you because it's about Rotary, where leadership is often built around service and collaboration. How do you see these concepts of vulnerability and courageous leadership aligning with Rotary principles? Can you share how adopting these ideas may influence the leadership, and what is the current reality with Rotary?
Well, good question. First, I would say that it's an organization, it's a voluntary organization, and the moment you have decorated somebody with the Rotary lapel pin, he's same as you. And as long as leadership understands that they are first among equals, and they are first among equals for a defined period, everything would be fine with organizations like Rotary. But unfortunately, in voluntary organizations, that does not happen because there is no other reward except moving up the ladder. And moving up the ladder, unfortunately, in voluntary organizations, especially in India because of our culture, completely depends on psychophancy. There is a lot of psychophancy operating, and I do believe that what is it that could change? First and foremost, leaders should understand that if they are elected, then they are elected for a particular purpose as first among equals and for a particular time. Most of them, by and large, get it, but there are a lot of people who don't get it also. They think that they are the kings for that one particular year and everything that they say needs to go on. This happens in a voluntary organization when you don't understand that your role is custodial rather than leadership in that sense of the word. So that was something that if they read this and understand that the vulnerability aspects and the emotional connect requirement, because the moment you do this, immediately you establish an emotional connect to the team that you pick. They realize that here is a guy who is walking with us. He's not walking ahead. He's not walking behind. He's walking with us. So that's basically what it is, and that is the emotional connect that is required. And then the other thing is that clarity. I mean, lot of leadership. You asked about district leadership. District leadership doesn't being elected as a district leader is not equal to having somebody who is clear. Clarity both in terms of whatever they want to do Plus in terms of talking to their group and then saying that, listen, this is what was needed to be done and you did not do it, and setting the boundaries and all those things. We just say, chalo yaar, 1 year, it will go. Doesn't matter. That kind of a thing, that doesn't work. So you don't really are respected as a leader. You're not looked up as a leader who is willing to show up. There will be messy times. There will be times when things don't happen the way. But then, are you willing to show up? I'll give you an example. For instance, tomorrow is my conference inaugural. This is a real story. I have invited the judge from the High Court as the chief guest. We are having the international representative already present, and a party is going on in a big hotel. 9 o'clock at night, I receive a call from the person who arranged for the guest to come. Invitations have been printed, etc. I'm not giving the name of the person. Now, Ram Subramaniam. There's no reason why I should not. Justice Ram Subramaniam was he has called and told that he cannot come tomorrow. My chief guest is not going to be there at the inaugural of the conference. Now, why? The Chief Justice has called for a meeting. There was this law college problem, if you remember. And 10:30 was the inaugural, 10:30 the meeting for all the judges with the Chief Justice. Finished. He just cannot be without attending that, so he has excused himself. At 9:30 at night, where do I go for a chief guest? For my district conference, which is the most important activity of my year. It is a mess. Absolute mess. And I'm sitting here in the lobby of a hotel, thinking what to do, and the first thing that I had to do was to call. I just made a call to somebody whom I trust, and I said, hey, listen, this is what it is. I am in a soup. What is it that can be done? I don't know how it happened. He just, hold on, I'll give the phone to a person whom you know very well, and you ask, he will not refuse. And he gave the phone to the Chief Secretary of Tamil Nadu. They were sitting down and they're having a drink. He gives the phone to the Chief Secretary, and then he knows me. And I said, sir, this is a problem. When do you want me there? 10:30. I'll be there, don't worry. Sir, thank you. Don't thank me, man. 10:30 tomorrow I'll be there at Chennai Trade Center. And that marked the end of it. But then you have to jump into that message. I could have been completely stumped. And I wouldn't have known what to do, and then try to carry on the conference without a chief guest. But then because I was willing to expose my vulnerability to somebody, and it so happened, yes, serendipity maybe it just happened that I had to get somebody with an entire press entourage, with an entire press coverage of all these things, which wouldn't have happened if the judge had come. This man came and then the whole thing happened. And what I'm trying to say is, in Rotary, we can get into messy situations, and, taking your team into confidence. There are other things that I don't want to say, but then the fact of the matter is, yes, this was one which I can expose on a table. Otherwise, yes, I've had situations when the entire conference team resigned, saying that they wouldn't work with the conference chair. 1 week before the conference. But how we sorted that out was some way, different way, but it happens. In Rotary, in a voluntary, let's not just talk Rotary. In a voluntary organization where nobody pays anybody to do anything, these kind of things can happen. And here is where one needs to be very, very clear in terms of where we stand and where our leadership starts and stops. That's very important. Thank you.
That was really, you didn't stop with that news getting shocked. You went ahead and sought help with somebody and you got a better result. I think that's a great example. Now this one is very specific to Rajaram, being from a highly regulated and risk-averse insurance industry. How do you think Brené Brown's emphasis on vulnerability and leading with courage can be applied, especially when leaders are expected to minimize risk? How do this concept enhance leadership effectiveness in such a structured organization? Does it work?
Ram, one thing I will say, insurance as a subject, because it deals with risk, and you think insurance companies are risk averse, it's the contrary. we are the biggest risk takers. Our job is in living in ambiguity and predicting possibilities and ensuring that we minimize the propensity, potential impact, negative impact by way of financially modeling. This is the essence of insurance. So basically, an underwriter is one who will never hesitate to jump out of an aircraft. He'll only ensure that he has a parachute and an emergency parachute. So we are clearly the best place to try out all these things. In that industry is where we always try out all these things. Because it's in the realm of propensity, it's the realm of predictions, it's the realm of large numbers providing you the capability to predict, and then trying to technically understand what is the risk that is coming into the pool, adjusting for it and putting it in the right commercial context. So overall, if you see, vulnerability and ensuring that risk is managed comes naturally to this industry. Having said that, the way the organizations kind of work, the larger ones especially, they become siloed because of the scale and the size of operations. That's where it becomes a little bit complex in terms of managing this kind of conversations, in terms of how do you motivate. One of the most difficult products to sell is an insurance contract. You are basically selling promises, and in life insurance, the promise is to be done after your time. Right? So selling that is the most difficult thing. And they are the most misunderstood people. If you see an insurance agent, you tend to walk away because he'll try to sell, or he will have difficult conversations about your mortality. We tend to keep that aside and think everything is certain, tomorrow I'll wake up alive. It's not true, but we tend to live in that fantasy. When somebody comes and punctures that fantasy and says, no, there's a lot of ambiguity, and puts fear into you about your mortality and all that, you tend to stay away from those guys. How do you motivate them? Looking at them, the society looks at them a little bit lower than a normal salesman who's selling an iPhone. He's probably welcomed, whereas this guy is told to stay away. Right? So how do you motivate them? How do you understand their feelings? Because their ego gets trampled every day in every meeting. And somewhere when they come back to the office, if the sales head also pulls them up and says, you have not done your enough number of cases, you don't do this, you don't do that, what is the motivation he'll have? He will go and reflect that in his household also. Then the family also will be unhappy. So there is this element where there's a strong case for having an empathy-based approach. Sympathy cannot be there. There's a lot of distinction between the two, but an empathic-based approach and ensuring that they have the clarity, which he mentioned, as a person in the society, what is their work and what is the worth of an insurance. If that insurance agent is imbibed it fully, then he won't mind whether somebody is talking to him or running away from him, because he knows Karmanyeva Adhikarisya is real for him. So that's where I would say, in an insurance context, concepts related to this are more of a natural fit, because it's not a risk-averse organization, it's a risk-managing organization.
So we have come to the end of this discussion. One final message to the future leaders. In one sentence, some essence of...
One sentence each, yes. Thank you. We have to understand that in this growing context of India, these concepts are very, very important. We are a multicultural, multi-language society, and a huge amount of the people who are going to deliver are coming from outside the cities and exposed to different kind of things. So you go and start talking about emotional literacy, this, that, and the other to them, and they have already started working. It doesn't matter. The guy is making a life for himself. At that point in time, for us, leaders or whoever wants to be a leader, you have to make a distinction. You will hear what is being said. But if you don't make the effort to understand what he is trying to say, you will make a mistake. Simply because a person in the Indian context never says what exactly he wants. He says something. But if you just take that at face value like you would do in the West, you will be making a mistake and the emotional connect will be lost. If you try to understand what he's trying to say and then take it out from him, then it will succeed. We are a huge nation and we are multicultural, but we are also a nation which has got a phenomenal amount of native wisdom. Let's not forget about the native wisdom that is available. Let's pull it out. Emotional literacy and whatever that is said in the book will pull that out and give us a head start in anything that we do. Thank you.
Thank you.
I will put it very simply. For future leaders, be real, be genuine, be grounded. That's all.
Okay, that is authentic. Thank you for that. So now we come to the questions from the audience. Is there anybody who wants to ask a question before I go to the online? Yeah. I will repeat your question. Okay.
Sir, as I understand, Brown seems to have focused on the emotional issues. How about the spiritual issues? Because management as a concept has come a long way from IQ to EQ and then to SQ. Then, second question, individual values and the organizational values. Because a team will have several members, core team will have several members, and any core team member will have more members under him. How can the individual values and the organizational values brought together for the success of the team? Then the courage to fail, it requires experimentation in any organization. How often such experimentation and in what context the experimentation is supposed to take place?
Very short answer, so I can do that. You're talking about spiritualism, right? She writes, she says, I'm not a religious person, but I'm a spiritual person. So, what I'm trying to say is, she makes the distinction, whether we make it or not. But she says that she's very spiritual. So I believe a lot of what she has written is based on the spiritualism that she has got. It's not that it is distinct from it, it is removed from it. I believe it is also part of the spiritualism, and that is the reason why it resonates a lot with a lot of values that we have in India and the way we do things in India, whether in the family or in the business, etc., as opposed to what we do in the West. So spiritualism is not excluded from this. I would request Rajaram to answer the other question that he has asked. Yeah.
So your other question is about how do you align individual values with the organizational values. The way she goes about, she offers two methods to it. One, she says that encourage each one of them to come out with their core values, which defines how they react and how they work and how they respond. And then collectively debate on it and agree on what should be the organization's values. The second approach is to clearly articulate with clarity what the organization's aim is or the purpose of an organization. Even before a strategy is developed for an organization, the first step is purpose. Define the purpose of the organization. Based on that purpose of the organization, what kind of values will be necessary for fulfilling that purpose in its completeness, in its what she calls as wholeheartedness way of looking at things. From there you derive that these are the values that we hold dear, and then have what they call in the jargon that she uses very often is that rumble, a meeting where people freely expose and debate, and they take time and iterate it several times before they finally agree on to it. And those conversations have to be very open. So each one gives their view or their perspective, and she says as a leader, you should be non-judgmental, Do not put your bias and say, this is what I think the values should be. Let each one relate and come back with their perspectives. Be non-judgmental, hear them out, then debate in a very open manner, willing to listen and come back with a consensus. That is sustainable. That kind of organization becomes more agile, becomes more productive, and becomes more efficient. As per research, that is what she says. So that's how they do the alignment between the individual and the enterprise. And the other question that you had, sir, was courage to fail and experiment. Then she talks about that. The key to that is having the sense of curiosity. It is only when you have the curiosity to not be satisfied with the status quo, you will be able to discover new things and new ways. And she quotes a lot of examples and case studies that have been done and how they have applied this principle of encouraging curiosity as the very basic value that will drive innovation. And when you have curiosity and driving innovation, when something fails, it doesn't disturb the leadership because they are already prepared themselves to say that it can fail, and we are ambiguous. We don't know whether it will succeed or not, but let's try it together. We are in it together. We will make changes as we go along. Innovation happens only when that sense of curiosity and acceptance of a diversity happens. She says, if you bring in all similar kind of people as the leader, you are only building echo chamber. So you have to build diverse talents into your organization, give them a free flow of ideas, encourage that, and be non-judgmental and accept all the perspectives, collectively debate, be open about it, and agree, and finally come out with some clear aspects of how you want to go ahead. And that is how you build a very innovation-based organization. But there again, as he rightly pointed out, she also gives a lot of stress on boundaries. How do you define those boundaries? And within those boundaries, how do you focus and create creativity? I hope I answered your question, sir.
That's a comprehensive answer to the question. Okay, now I'm going to the first question from the audience, the online audience. This is to PDG Subbu. Why PDG? Because it's from a Rotarian. I think Raja from Namakkal. As a Rotary leader, how do you encourage open dialogue and trust building in community-based projects?
Open dialogue and trust building, I am assuming that it is going to be open dialogue and trust building between the community and Rotary. Can I make that assumption?
Yeah.
Okay. If I make that assumption, it's actually very easy. Say it exactly as it is. Now, don't say anything that is different from the absolute truth. Because what happens is there is truth and absolute truth. Most times we tend to say the truth, but we don't tell the absolute truth. Now, if you want the community to trust you, you have to understand that it's a very diverse set of people. So it is better to stick to the absolute truth and nothing but the absolute truth when it comes to a project. If you have problems, if you don't know, if you have to get permissions, and if you don't know whether all that is going to happen, don't make grandiose announcements. What will happen is every time you make an announcement and it does not happen, there will be a little bit of erosion of the trust. Whereas if you say, yes, we are here, these things need to be done. Once these are done, this is where we will, and we will keep you posted. We don't even know whether it will happen or not happen because other agencies are involved. Typical of what this book says. Don't be scared. Fear and courage go hand in hand. That's a fundamental premise of this book. Sachin Tendulkar, when he goes to bat first, last time he went into bat, he had butterflies in his stomach before he faced his first ball. It is there, but then you go and present yourself. Same thing with Rotary. If you want to talk to the, so to say, your community, better to be open, straightforward, total truth, as it is on the face of it. We are doing a project for the community, for the sake of the community. So there's no reason for us to take anything more than what we are doing. That's what it is.
Okay.
I
think
hope I've
that's
answered the question.
clear enough, I think. Okay. Now this is to Mr. Rajaram. With your experience in international business and trade, how do you manage cross-cultural challenges while staying authentic to your leadership style? This is from Bhaskar from Chennai.
This is something every MNC corporate executive is facing today. And since geography is removed out of the equation, so the distance doesn't matter, you still need to manage different cultures and different perceptions. The first thing that helped me, and of course I was also trained in those aspects in my corporate career, the first thing that they always say is, before you speak, listen. And when you listen to what is said and what is left unsaid, and you also observe and understand a little bit based off the perspective that they are coming from, the cultural background that they are coming from. In a cross-functional, cross-cultural team, somebody might be coming from Japan. There are 3 barriers that person has to face. One is the language barrier. Second is the Japanese way of articulating a point of view is never direct. It's always slightly winded, and they give you signals which you need to interpret. So you need to understand there are certain things which is very intrinsic to Japanese society, like the concept of face. Whereas when you have a German in a team or a British person or a American, it's very direct. And you don't have to worry too much in terms of understanding any other meaning other than what has been communicated. They tend to be very transactional. Here it tends to be more relational. So you need, when you're having a task on hand and you're creating a team, you ensure that the right skill sets are identified, but as the team leader, you need to ensure that you are the point of contact for them to give the assurance and confidence. So that comes when you listen, the spoken word and the unspoken word, and you also observe and understand the cultural differences that comes in. That's number 1. Number 2, when you are in a cross-cultural team, it also helps if you clearly define to each one of them that when you are working in a cross-cultural team, everybody is expected to adopt the rules of that team for that occasion, which is framed by us as leaders and communicated with the reason why those rules are in place. And you encourage the observance of those rules for that particular set period of time. So it might pull these people out of their comfort zones, but they know that is the expectation, and they will also make a change to ensure that they are cognizant of each other's cultural preferences and the way articulation of their views have to be done. You frame that correctly, you set the context first up. Third, as much as possible, you ensure that you provide the input on how to deal with cross-cultural teams to the other team members. When you feel that you need to give an advice that when you're talking to a Japanese, please look out for these things or don't do these things. As a team leader, you are supposed to provide that guidance. So cultural sensitivity is there, must be there with you, and also you should ensure that it is percolated to all the teams. With these 3, I think we can manage.
Thank you so much. I think we have come to the end of the session. Thank you very much, Subbu and Rajaram, for sharing your insights. And thank you, audience, for being patient with us. I hope you enjoyed the session. And those online who are viewing this program, thank you again. Some of the questions could not be asked for paucity of time, but we will revert to you for your questions. Thank you.